to item 3 on the agenda, delegations. Bill Weingard will present the Brockton Strategic Action Plan and explain how our visioning process and the introductory session will work. So Mr. Weingard, welcome to the Brockton Council meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good afternoon, members of council and staff. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for a piece of your afternoon. I've promised Councillor Hudson that we'll be out of here well before 4 o'clock, so that's gives us plenty of time. I'm looking forward to working with you today, but with this process will stretch over 4 months or so. So with any luck in that period of time, I might even have a chance to meet face to face. Let's hope, eh? Okay, next please, Fiona. Okay, we're going to share screen there.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the last one. The one I was hoping we'd do now is one that's just called I think it's called Introduction, workshop number 1.
Oh, you're on mute.
You just want to give me 1 second here, and I'll make sure I can get us to the right slide.
Yeah.
You'd like it to be the one that says introduction.
You know what? Maybe we can it's just simply an introduction to the our workshop today. Let me just say that we're looking to basically outline the process, and then that'll be me talking until Sonia gives me the hook, and then we'll have I'd like to have some discussion harking back to the 2013 Sustainable Brockton Plan and sort of where that stands now, what we can learn from that, and look ahead to some of the headwinds and tailwinds we can anticipate on some of the strategies that were adopted by the council and community back then. First thing I was going to do is introduce myself. I think you have that already. You have a picture of me back a few years ago when there were still barber shops open in Etobicoke. And I guess all I even want to say about that is that I have worked in small municipalities, combination of rural and urban areas. And I have also worked as a consultant doing strategic planning for many. And so that's my qualifications to be here this afternoon and work with you for the next few months. If you have any more questions about my background, you're welcome to ask them offline. I'm happy to answer.
I'll bring us up here.
Okay, next. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, next one, please, Fiona. Next. Yeah. Oh, let me, for March the 2nd, just to, in the interest of making this a manageable Zoom process, we are going to break this into 2, as you know. And so the objective of our meeting next week will be to focus on the community surveys that will be part of this process and starting as of the week after next. So I'll touch on that briefly today, but mostly we're going to spend our time next week talking about that. That's a little bit of my background. Sports analogies is the next slide. No strategic planning process is complete without a little reference to Yogi Berra, as I'm sure many of you have experienced before. And so there's Yogi Berra talking about the need for planning. And then in the material that was sent around to you, you have some examples of what council has adopted in places that I've worked before. So I won't belabor any more of that. Next set of slides are about the reason why we're doing a strategic action plan and what it's likely to entail, and maybe what it'll look like. I mean, it's yours to fashion, but maybe what it'll look like by the time we're finished. Essentially to set a framework for the work we're about to undertake. Next one, please, Fiona. I think the fundamental point I want to make here is that I see this as being it's something that's adopted by council. I could use the analogy. Analogies are always dangerous, I know that, but I'll use an analogy anyway of an orchestra. So I'm really only here to twirl the baton. The music is going to be written by council and staff, and obviously staff and council and committees and organizations and so on will be, playing the music after we're finished. So I consider myself to be maybe a ghostwriter, but this is council's work, and I hope that you'll find that I'm helpful in getting that done with obviously the expert advice of the staff as well. And but ultimately, this is not a study, and I hope that that's clear as we proceed. All right, next, please. Typically, I've found that municipal strategic plans and action plans, talking about specifically what's going to be done within a limited period of time, 4 years in this case. Councilors want to touch on what I call 3 realms of responsibility. The one that, and we'll harken back before we're finished for the day to the 2013 Sustainable Brockton Plan, talks about your role as community representatives, and there was a lot of work done then to talk about what the community wants done, and then we still have the job to do of fashioning specifically over the next 4 years what we're going to do there. Yeah, as you know, I'm telling what you know here, so I apologize for that. You're the corporate board of directors of a multi-million-dollar corporation, which is very much in the public eye, and so that aspect of your role as well. And then trustees of multi-million dollars, and more importantly, of the community's assets. And I know that municipalities obviously take that seriously with your asset management plans and so on. So typically, I've found that most councils want to have elements of their action plan that touches on all those 3 aspects of what the function you fulfill. Okay, the next one, please. This is where I've been warned not to get too preachy here. As you can tell, I mean, having done lots of strategic planning with numerous councils, and having done strategic planning with my own councils in Gravenhurst and Caledon, I'm a devotee. I'm a fan, and I think they're important work, and they will prove to be very useful. Essentially, for council, this is really about leadership. It's about cohesion and working together, saying, hey, we puzzled this thing through ourselves. We know kind of the path that we're headed for the next few years. And then a sense of accomplishment, both for council and staff. Having been there, and I know that you all recognize that, being on council or being on staff, you miss a lot of Leaf Tea games on TV, right? You miss, I know from experience, you miss some of your own sons or grandsons' hockey games. And out of that, you deserve to have some sense of accomplishment. And people expect you to as well. It's been fun to accomplish some things. So that's one of the things I think why we're doing what we're doing here for the next few months. Next slide, please. Mostly here, this is about alignment, to make sure that the staff are clear about, aside from the regular, we'll talk in a minute about day-to-day activities, but aside from that, some of the accomplishment things that the council's wanting to achieve, and then so that all the oars can pull in the same direction. And again, for staff as well as for council, some sense of accomplishment when some of these things get done. Next one, please, Fiona. It's a public document that is being prepared in conjunction with the public, and taking advantage of a lot of work that's already been done publicly through some of your past studies and so on. So it's, I think from the public point of view, to some extent, it's about transparency. What are you trying to achieve, and what do you think you are going to be able to achieve within a certain period of time? It's about accountability. So you said you wanted to do this. Can you keep tabs, keep reporting on how you're making out? Are we getting there? What signs of progress can you point to? And then most importantly, I think it's about, we all know in small communities that without public support and a lot of community organizations and so on, other governments, neighboring municipalities, a lot of these things just won't be possible. And so garnering that support by letting people know in advance, here's the path we're on, here's where we want to head in the next few years, it gets you a lot better. Don't want to quote Yogi Berra again, but gets you a lot better chance of getting where you want to go. Okay, next please. And the same can be said with other governments, that if they know where you want to go and similarly you know what they're looking for, they can help you get there, providing resources, support, partnerships, and so on. Okay, next please. This is an important slide, I think. I know in my Gravenhurst days, we did it was the first of our 3 strategic plans with council and staff there. I went out and talked to the public works crew and afterwards and said, here's the path that council has chosen, some of the things we'd like to accomplish over the next few years. And, they said, hey, we're not mentioned in there. And I mean, what are we, chopped liver? I mean, how come you don't talk about, all the good work that we do? And I was able to say to them, well, this is good news. This is actually good news because basically the message from council is keep calm and carry on. You're doing good things. Don't stop plowing snow. Don't stop patching potholes and all the rest of the good work you do. By the same token, there's a level above even though your name's not mentioned, there's a level where, you can fit into some of the things that what the council's trying to achieve. So managing your assets, monitoring the condition of the assets, keeping them up to date is something that Public Works, crews obviously very keen to do and very, very sensitive about. So it's important, I think, and a message for the public as well, to say, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's all the good stuff that you're doing is going to carry on, unless for some reason you say, hey, you know what? We've looked back at some of the things we're doing. We don't really think that's giving us results. We maybe want to change that or change how we do it or what we do. So that's a possibility. And I've certainly worked with councils where they say, yeah, part of our plan is to reduce some things that we're doing or change how we're trying to get some results because the way we're doing it now isn't working. But typically speaking, it's saying, as I say, the icing on the cake, and the cake carries on. All the buildings get inspected and the snow gets removed. Particularly in Bruce County, the snow better get removed. Okay, next. Yeah, this is my message again to say I don't see this as a study. I see this as being me helping you, with building a clear collective path for the next several years. It's not forever, it's for several years and things can change, but ideally it'd be something you use when you're making your future decisions that relate to the things you've charted out. And particularly, one of the reasons I think that you bring in a rank outsider like myself and for a project like this is this whole issue about priorities. There's just lots of stuff that you would like to do, lots of stuff that staff know that could be done, should be done, and certainly the public has lots of expectations as well. And it can't all be done. And so the question of setting priorities as to how you use your time and resources and sort of timing for some of the great things, that's one of the values of a plan like this. And you'll know it's a success if in fact you do refer to it consistently when these questions of where your time and resources are going to be spent arise. Okay, next please. Other important points to make. You're already doing on almost any point we're going to touch on. There are things you've either recently done, which have some repercussions as you look forward. The example I use, and it doesn't pertain to Brockton necessarily, but if it has pertained to places I've worked before. You've just finished an arena, but now you have to think about the staffing and ice time allocation, and there's some follow-up activity that has to happen with some of these things. There are things you're already doing, and I know, having perused your website and talked to Sonia already, there's a lot of stuff on the go, so those, let's not forget that those things are already on the go. They're going to take time and resources. Anything that takes significant time and resources over and above the basics, inspecting buildings and plowing snow, needs to be, I think, referred to here. And there are going to be some things that you say, we've got so much on the go already. that the sky is not the limit. There are some, you're limited as to what other you can add to the plate over the next specific period of time, let's say 4 years. There are some things that, and let's face it, it's nice to have that sense of accomplishment again. A period of sort of 4 years where you can say, okay, we started, we finished, and let's have a bit of a celebration, because ultimately I think some of this is about celebration, to say we set out to do this, we got it done, we knew we could do it, and we're going to celebrate by golly when we're finished. There are some things that will extend, and this is a good thing. It's not like federal government shipbuilding or something. It extends well beyond what anybody had expected it to. There's some things you start now and that are going to go well beyond the specific action plan period. I guess looking at your preparations, if you like, for a new arena, and there's an example of the kind of thing that would say, you start now with maybe reserve funds, fundraising, design work, environmental assessments, those kinds of things. But that's the work, not necessarily as gratifying as cutting the ribbon, but you've got to start there so that at some point in the future, you can have that. So your next round, if you like, maybe when you actually finish some of these projects. And then I think it's important to say that there going to be some things that you can say, it's maybe not something that needs to be on our action plan for this current 4-year period, but we know that something's coming down the pipe at us, which we're going to like, or maybe we're not going to like. And either way, we should start to think about that. So there's room in an action plan for some kinds of actions which are maybe a little fuzzier than most. Fuzzy is one of the things I think you've gotten me on board here to help you prevent, but sometimes you want to, there's room for explore, I'll call it a verb like explore or anticipate or research, where you can say, yeah, it's maybe not an issue right now, but boy, it's coming at us and we better start thinking about it now. So all of those time horizons, I think I tell the story about when I first went to Gravenhurst. I was a fresh and keen young chief administrative officer. And I went in to see our director of planning one afternoon, and I said, Patrick, I got some ideas about, how we might be able to do some things differently. And he listened, carefully for 20 minutes or so. And he said, twinkle in his eye. His name was Hennessy, so you can imagine the Irish twinkle in his eye. And he said, Bill, those are all fantastic ideas. They're really good ideas. So what we should do? We should go out in the office and find somebody who's not doing anything, and they can pick that up right away. Obviously, we all know there's a lot of stuff going on. And so making sure we take account of the things that are going on already is very important to be fair in a project like this. Okay, next, please. Roughly the structure of the thing is likely to be 4, 5, 6, maybe broad themes and goals. You've got 4 of them already in that community-facing plan that was done in 2013. I can't imagine there's any reason not to use those, the main pillars. And then within each of those, there's likely to be some more kind of not time-limited directions that you would take. Would be maybe move to the next slide, please, Fiona, if you would. An example I always find easier to refer to than broad generalities. So if, as has always been the case, both in the places I've worked as well as the other councils I've worked with on strategic plans, business, jobs, employment, economic development has always been one of the goals. And then there's a number of ways, depending on your circumstances and so on, that could be handled. And revitalizing downtown, I know that is already in your 2013 plan. You've got facade improvement programs, community improvement policies, and so on. But that's not time limited, and it's not yours alone by any means. There's other parties that are needed, and it's not time limited. So you've been working on it, you'll keep working on it, and I suspect that well after 2025, you'll be working on it on still. Industrial parks, branding and marketing, et cetera, right? There's numerous kinds of, ongoing means toward the end, I can put it that way. But then what we're hoping to do out of this project is to get down to the level of specific initiatives that are pertaining to the 2021, 2025 period we're talking about. So they could be as detailed, again, this example, it's just an example here. Something like we want to have, Victorian streetlights, Durham Road Park, et cetera. Free parking, signage, marketing programs, et cetera. Different specific things to say, we are going to start these or continue things that are going on. It's how we're going to spend our time and resources and the results we want to achieve over this next 2021, 2025 period. So that's where we'll spend most of our time at that level of detail. Okay, please. And that's the level 2 where two kinds of measures. One is a progress measure, and mostly that's your staff reporting to council, committees involved, task forces, and so on, to say, okay, do we have some mileposts along the way that we can report on to say, this is how we are proceeding towards getting this action done or continuing the action that's already been started or prepared for one which is going to start after our 2025 period. The other measure is the measure of, is the measure of who cares. And that's the measure of outcome. So what good is it doing? And that's where we roll back up again to the level of, okay, in this example, revitalizing downtown. There would be downtown being revitalized, and how do we know? How do we know we're having a winning season? So, some of these measures may not be available, but you're looking for proxies sometimes, which are about the community. People can actually see and say, yeah, we are making progress on, who cares about the streetlights? But when it's actually having an impact. More businesses downtown, more pedestrians, different ways of measuring whether or not it's actually having an outcome that the community notices, which is really why you're doing it all. Okay, so Fiona, thanks. One of the challenges is not to reinvent the wheel. With your 2013 plan for many elements of what I suspect will be your action plan really sets a very good stage. The public has spoken in a way, right? I remember reading there's 500 people that contributed to spelling out how the kind of community they'd like to see. So now, as I say, it needs some meat on some really good bones. There, you've got other studies that you've undertaken. There's work underway on other things. Park, we're now asking for committee members for example. A number of recommendations out of the Municipal Services Review, the Business Retention and Attraction Study, and there's others, organization review and so on. And I think one of the challenges to make sure that those things are captured. And in fact, my guess is that with all the good work that you've already done, one of your challenges will be, one of our challenges as we proceed will be to prioritize some of those things. There's only so much that you're going to be able to do in a 4-year period. And so if you hear me say this once, you hear me say it a dozen times, great ideas are essential and they abound. There's lots of great ideas. What's not quite so abundant are time, money, support, partners, resources, et cetera. And so one of the things we want to do with all the work that you've already done is to pick out of those the things that remain to be done and add them to the list that we're going to be thinking about and evaluating and setting priorities among. Okay, next please. So the community-facing goals and strategies, there's a lot of that work already done by lots of members of the public. What I'd like to see us discuss before we leave today is what can we learn from the past work that's going on to try to achieve some of those things. What's going on now? Let's not forget what's going on now that's already moving the yardsticks. Sports analogies, I know. My wife keeps telling me, skip the sports analogies, but I can't do it. And then looking to the future. So what we're going to talk about doors and walls, and we're going to talk about headwinds and tailwinds, but what do we see that's going to make a difference to what we can achieve? And then what's naturally enough, I mean, legitimately you would expect, not in that, but is in a number of other works you've done, municipal service review, organizational review, maybe branding, some of those things, is I'll call it, if you don't mind, the corporate facing goals and strategies. So that would be things like the nature, and as I said before, in your role as board of directors, that the nature of your corporation, your government, items like customer service, maybe relationships with other organizations and other municipalities, other levels of government, relationships between council and staff, all that realm of thing. And then your role as trustees, and obviously the biggest one typically there is about assets and infrastructure and the maintenance of them. So we're going to spend a lot of time. That's not something we're going to spend time at in the first stages of this process, but we're going to come back and maybe even in person, who knows, but we'll have a day of it, probably in about 2 months from now, where we add in some of your thinking about this, I'll call it corporate facing goals and strategies. Okay, next please. Yeah, so priorities. There's, as I said before, time and resources and partners and support are always going to be limited. So we need to be conscious about what things we put in the action plan. And we basically, nobody wants to overcommit. By the same token, we don't want to undermobilize, right? We want something to say, this is exciting, man, I'm keen to be part of this action. By the same token, we just can't get there with all of these. And so we've got to make sure that we are clear about our priority. It's mostly about timing. We think within 4 years we can do some things and some things we can't get to yet. Not to say we'll never get there, but mostly about timing. And some of it's about how you undertake things. Well, we're going to prepare for some things. We're going to get some other things done, right? Different ways of expressing priority. And it's usually some sort of a combination of how important it is that something get done, how much support, motivation, expectation on the part of the community, and how feasible it is. On a number of, we'll talk in a couple of months about, a number of ways of looking at feasibility. Some of it could strictly be things like technical engineering feasibility, but it's always going to be things like cost, partnerships and support. It's going to be a big one, as well as things, jurisdiction in some cases. So all of those, ways of thinking about. And I think what we're looking at is to say, we want to pick the things which are in that bit of an arc there that are important to get done. People will say, yeah, that's the right thing to be doing, and that you can get done. And so, and including some things that you're already in the process of getting done, you can sustain them through the 4 years. And so those are the things where you can say, again, you come out of it with a sense of meeting expectations by, in some senses, making sure that the expectations are built around what's worth doing and what can get done. All right, next one, please. Another way of saying the same thing. In a 4-year period, a successful plan that you actually use and that the public can see what you're trying to do. Staff, importantly, can see what you think you're going to try to get done. It unfortunately can't be all things to all people. I mean, not in the first few years anyway. Not to say you want to slough off important things or different elements of community I do find important, but you have to choose your actions according to both their worthiness as well as the feasibility. Now, Sonia didn't give me the hook, so I guess I think that's pretty much the end of my preaching. Are there any? And we'll have a chance when we meet again next week if there's more to talk, sort of questions about process or why the heck are we doing this anyway? How are we going to go about it? We'll have a chance to talk a bit more about that. But in the meantime, are there any questions that anybody has or comments?
Okay, thank you, Bill. Any questions from council? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Peabody. Yeah, just with respect to process and I guess outcome, what we might expect to see, you've given us a great overview of some of the history and some of the measurements that you talked about. I wonder if, as a part of the outcome of this process, we're going to see a document that really relates to what you were speaking to just recently, and that is who's going to do what and by when. So I'm thinking something along the lines of a project plan or a Gantt chart that really maps that out clearly within the timeframes that we're talking about.
Good point. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Grisak. Yeah. So assigning some responsibilities, definitely, if we can be clear enough about what the action is, then you assign responsibilities for it. And then, as I say, probably two types of measures. Some of the whole progress measures are almost yes, no, got done, didn't get done. But others would be what's the outcome, and some of that will be proxy measures. We'll have to think about. You don't want to spend infinite amounts of money just collecting data to report on things. But if there's usable measures available, then we need to know, because that's the expectation of the community, right? Why? Timing is going to be the thing we spend a lot of time talking about, because that's again the question of priorities. So what do we going to need? Some of it's logical sequence, right? We need to amend the official plan to provide for certain types of housing policies in order to then develop a housing program. I'm making that up as I go here, but that kind of logical sequence. Most of it will be about that arc that I talked about, to say, okay, so things that we think are most worth doing and most feasible, that's the low-hanging fruit. So let's put that up. That's the first year or two. Some other things to say, we've got some work to do in order to make that feasible. Maybe it's some saving, maybe it's some other things falling off the table. And so that's going to be more like year 3, 4, maybe 5. And then some things where you say, we're not losing sight of this good idea, but that good idea isn't something we can see getting done in the next 4 years. So we'll likely work in terms of those kind of 3 time periods. Next year or 2, next 3 or 4 years, and then beyond that. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yep. As I say, I'll look forward to that matching people to tasks and accurate timelines, I guess, because as you say, we can't be all things to all people, and we need to pick the most important things that are feasible to get done within a reasonable amount of time. So I'll look for that. Thank you.
And if I may, just to finish that thought, a lot of that has to do with partners as well. Something when we talk about feasibility, if you have partners, I mean, if the Rotary Club signs on to say, hey, we want to work with you on this one, love that, love it. Then that's going to advance the timetable of some of these things in all possibility, right? Okay.
Thank you.
And as I say, we'll be meeting next week. We have a chance to talk some more about all this feeling. Okay, Fiona, there's a Word document that is entitled Planning Process. If you could flip to the second page, I guess, which just says summary.
Okay, I am actually going to allow Callie to flip through some of the slides, because that way I can take minutes at the same time. So thank you to Callie. So she will be.
Yes, thank you, Callie.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay. Quick summary here. Our first couple of meetings today and next week are about looking back a little bit at the sort of I'll call them community-facing goals and strategies from 2013, and then to next week to look at the community surveys. So, because a lot of very valuable input will come out of this community surveys, and that then puts us into about a 2-month period almost where the surveys are being conducted. We can do a little bit more consultation with the staff. It's important that the municipal staff feel that they're part of this and have a chance to get their oar in. And the surveys will be, there are going to be 3 of them. One of them will be a random sample household survey. So invitations sent out to, I think we said 500 or 600 households with a questionnaire. We'll talk about that on the 2nd of March to get input about what kinds of questions you'd most like to have public guidance on. The same questions for anybody. So a second survey is online. Anybody who wants to answer, any individual, not households this time, please, give us your thoughts. And all of these will be, I know from having done many of these now, that there's a lot of time goes into reading all the thoughts that are put forward, categorizing them and digesting them to sort of pre-digesting them in a way that I can report back to you and say, here's what the public has said to us. And then we're going to do an additional one, which will be a little different, focusing specifically on economic development kinds of questions and specifically to the business community as well. So that's all happening in March. As I say, getting survey results back, analyzing them and reporting back to you. And then that happens at I'm thinking end of April, likely. We'll have our next workshop together where we talk about what does all this tell you? What we make of the input that we've got. One of the, I'm just sort of looking ahead a little bit. My expectation is from experience that we're likely to get about a 33% response rate, about a third, 30%, somewhere in there, for the by invitation household survey. We're likely to get 400 individual responses. I'd be disappointed if we didn't, put it that way. If we get more, that'd be great too. I know in Penetanguishene we had well over 500 actually, individuals who just chimed in online with their ideas. And then one of the questions that we ask everybody is, if there was just one thing that the municipality, specifically the municipality now, could do right now that would make Brockton a better place, what would that one thing be? Pretty powerful stuff. So by the time all the surveys are submitted, I'm guessing we're likely to have 500, maybe 600 answers to that question. That's a pretty powerful indication of what people think from just strictly addressed to you, the municipality, are the highest priorities. Some of them will be fairly general, like more jobs. My personal favorite from some other projects are better dining facilities and more bars. I don't expect actually that Brockton's going to start operating taverns, but by the same token, there are a lot of them which are quite specific and quite useful. Some of those will be fix the street light at the corner of X and Y, and I won't report back to council about those, but those will go to the relevant member of your department head team, and the rest of it. Say we can digest to say here's some important sense of priorities that the public has about what they'd like to see, certainly well within the 4-year time period that we're talking about. The result of that workshop then will be what I'm calling a preliminary bit of a scattershot, a little preliminary set of action ideas for the 4-year period. And the purpose of doing that is you're not committed to that by any means, and we'll make that clear. But to say, okay, here's something to just, my wife is an editor by trade, so she always says it's a lot easier to edit than it is create. So people can say, okay, I want to react to getting people's reaction to those things. We'll do that in a few ways. One of them is electronically. And the second will be a series of focus groups where we get together 8 or 10, a dozen people maybe by Zoom if necessarily, but not necessarily by Zoom, to react to what's been proposed in a preliminary sort of a way, and give us their sense of what the priority ought to be and what the feasibility is of doing some of these things, and really their sense of what would make the most difference to the community. We bring all of that back. We're now talking about late May, I would think, to another workshop with you all, and where we talk about. In the meantime, I'll have asked for a day of your senior staff time to do some kind of, I'll call it sort of technical assessment of things. What give us a ballpark cost about this, what this idea might be or that idea might be. What kind of jurisdictional issues arise? what kind of support are we likely to get from other governments, those kinds of things. All of that gets fed back to you, as I say, probably late May. And that's also the time then we start to say, okay, let's winnow that down by looking at some of these issues of feasibility and looking back at my little arc there and to say, and what kind of a timing would we put on some of these things? What sort of measures would we use to say that we're doing the right thing and making progress? And then, as the Deputy Mayor says, who's in it with us and to whom and to what group or bodies would we assign getting this thing done. Finally, we're into June, and we'd be talking about a semi-final draft of a complete action plan. And then all of that circulating electronically for sort of final input, if you like, refining that, and then presenting that to you, if you like, to you on your own behalf by the end of June. That's the summary. While we're doing all of that, we're also going to do a bit of a specific focus on economic development actions. All of the economic development actions, of course, will ultimately have to be adopted by council. It's yours, it's your plan. But we'll use the Economic Development Committee as advisors, if you like, certainly to invite the business community for that survey, to give us some sort of feedback on the preliminary action plan that we put out there for feedback purposes, and then to review the input that we've got from the feedback groups and so on that we've asked. We'll do probably about 3, I would think, specific feedback groups related to the economy. Tentatively speaking, the Walkerton BIA, Federation of Agriculture members, and maybe the development and / real estate sector. We can play with that. We have some time to do that, but that would strike me as off the top, perhaps making some sense. And then that feedback would be fed into the Economic Development Committee, who would in turn provide some recommendations to you. There's more in the material that was circulated to you. There's more detail about the process. I don't think I'll belabor that now. I'm hoping that looks like it will work for you, work for us all, and takes us to a fairly intensive program from between now and the end of June. Any questions or thoughts about that? All right. And as I say, we'll be back again next week. So if anything occurs to you in the meantime, we'll have a chance to chat more. Good. Okay. So now, Callie, to the slides about the 2013 Sustainable Brockton Plan, please. Yeah. I thought this was a good place to start because a lot of work went into this. As you read this plan, there's a lot of public input, and it really does set out for the community-facing aspects of your action plan. You don't need to reinvent some of the stuff. It's there. It's not like people aren't suddenly going to decide, no, we're not interested in tourism anymore. We're not interested in, successful agriculture. All those things they're going to last for generations, if not certainly for the next 4 years. And so, I think we can use them as a bit of a starting off point. They also, I think, allow us to have some discussion, which is sort of the last item on the agenda for today, about what's worked, maybe hasn't worked so well, what's ongoing, what are we doing now that we think, hey, this is really proving successful, and then what the future holds in each of these categories. So next one, please, Kelly. So there's what the community said were their key goals for the Brockton they want to see. A Brockton that offers community and cultural events and gathering places. A Brockton that preserves its rural heritage and its history. And a Brockton that gives residents and visitors the opportunity to participate in, appreciate, and support the arts. Next one, please, Kelly. People see a Brockton which supports and attracts local businesses that provide employment. Brockton that supports the agricultural economy and that promotes year-round tourism. See a Brockton that recognizes and protects its natural assets, that maintains land use planning that considers the interests of present and future residents, and that makes wise decisions about its natural resources. And they see a Brockton that supports the service groups and volunteers that in many respects are the lifeblood of the community, that promotes safe and healthy lifestyles, which would include so use of leisure time, the healthcare system would include the safety services as well, and serving all the needs of all the demographics that constitute the community. They see a Brockton which fosters lifelong learning opportunities, and a Brockton that develops diverse and efficient modes of transportation. So as I said, I'd be very surprised if any of those things at that level have changed over the last 8 years. Circumstances may have changed, and so getting there and what actions make sense to in the next 4 or 5 years. Those will certainly have changed. And as I say, those are good bones. And so one of the things that we'll be doing is putting meat on those bones rather than having to make them up again from scratch. Okay, next. Yeah, so what I'd like to do now is to ask for input, really, because I'll do a little bit of a summary, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 pages out of this, which we'll post on the website and perhaps circulate to some of the organizations in the community about your observations on these very questions. So for each of those, how many were there? 16, I think, goals for Brockton. What have we learned over the past 5 or 10 years about as we pursue them? Essentially, what's produced results and what hasn't? And I sometimes say that that's a matter of we're looking for doors and we want to avoid running headlong against the wall, right? So where are the doors we can get ourselves through? What's the good stuff that's going on now that you want to sustain? Yeah, here's a way we're pursuing that thing now, and it's good. We want to make sure we're keeping that going. And then we want to look to the future. So this is about headwinds and tailwinds. There's going to be some things that we can anticipate happening over the next 5, 10 years, maybe. They were saying this isn't going to help us much to get some of these things done. Conversely, there are going to be some things say, we see some things coming up. We see some tailwinds. We see the likelihood that there's going to be some things happening that will get us. We can use to get us further faster. And so that's a discussion that I'm going to stop talking, believe it or not, and grab my pen and start making notes while I ask for your input on that. Let's start back with the first one, if we can, Callie, which is about the offering. Brockton that offers community and cultural events and gathering places. What do you have to tell me about what have we learned from the past 5 or 10 years about what works and what doesn't work? What's going on now? They say here's we're still working on that one, and we look like we're having some success. And then similarly, what do you see in the future that's going to say this is going to work for us, and what particularly external factors? I'm not so much talking about the question of money yet. Obviously, but on the other hand, if you anticipate over the next several years, people are going to come forward with there may well be elections over the next several years. That tends to be more some support for various activities that arise. So that's an example of one where you would say, yeah, we can anticipate this happening, so we want to be ready for that. Okay. Any thoughts? Finding doors.
Well, Bill, I wanted to comment on something that you just touched on there, which was missing from the first plan, and that's the role of council, as well as the role of the election cycle. You just mentioned that in council, where there are campaigns conducted, people go door to door, they have public meetings, they find out what the community wants, and depending on who gets elected and what platform they ran on, that can shape where the council's going. So, Bill, an example would be. Going forward, we have Councillor Lang. He's not here today, but he's running on a platform going down the road to construct a new community center. But we do have some members on council who are opposed to that. So I mean, you could build that into your plan, but what happens if council gets elected that doesn't support?
I misspoke. I have to apologize. I was thinking more about federal and provincial elections where you suddenly get support that you maybe hadn't otherwise anticipated. That was my reference to elections, and it's just an example of, particularly with infrastructure. It tends to have been a pattern over a good chunk of my professional lifetime anyway, that, there are new forms of support are offered that, as I say, as Yogi Berra would say, if you know where you're going, you can take advantage to get there. It's just an example. Yeah.
But how would you build that into this plan with the municipal politics? I think that has to be acknowledged. It wasn't in the first plan. And so, for example, right now we're experiencing very strong growth. You could end up with a council that says, hey, we don't want any more growth. We want to keep it a small town, and we want to cap things here. Maybe that's not in the strategic plan. I don't know. I wouldn't be of that camp, but you just never know what's going to happen in the election municipally. Kind of council.
Are you anticipating that the external demand for growth will be sustained? I mean,
yes.
Your point is saying certainly, I worked in Caledon, for heaven's sakes, where this was an issue full time every time was, how much are we going to allow and how fast and how we're going to make sure the infrastructure keeps up, et cetera. But the external demand was there. And so I guess that's my question for you. Are you anticipating that the external demand for, let's say residential to start with, is likely to be there for the next several years?
Well, we hope so. We're struggling along with, at one point just a few years ago, 13 houses a year. And then we had 60, 70 this year. But we'd like to sustain that growth. I just threw it out there. You could end up with some people in the community saying, hey, we don't want to end up like Orangeville. We just want to keep it a small town. It all depends on the election cycle. I'm just throwing that out there, Bill, but we'll move along here. Deputy Mayor Gierzak?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, Mayor Peabody, that, after elections, staff always does, I think, a little bit of a reality check. This was our strategic plan. Are we still on track, or do we need a new strategic review, that sort of thing? So I would see that happening as a normal course of business. We put our best foot forward from the 50,000 foot view, and then working down to lower levels. And 2023, I guess, staff will do a check to see if we're on track or if we need to make some adjustments.
And through you, Mayor Peabody, I would just comment also, we are going to have, community engagement in this and focus groups. And so what's going to be included that's achievable should be, what our community is advocating for also. And then it's up to this council to decide how we can achieve that and listen to the residents. So in the end, when you're campaigning for the election next time, the expectation may be, unless there's drastic changes, that you would be hearing the same types of things. But again, Deputy Mayor Gierzak is right. With each new council, we have to reevaluate those priorities through our orientation sessions and how we begin that new council.
Okay.
Other external factors that you see, let's look ahead. Things that are going to make a difference to from any of really, but then we started off talking about cultural events and gathering places, but it could be any. And obviously growth, if you have an external demand for residential growth and more people, that will affect almost everything that you want to do and the public is responding to.
Okay, Dean.
I got confused. What's the question again that we're supposed to be answering? Is it external factors? Or is it the cultural that has worked in the past or is in line with did we switch from cultural to external factors?
Well, I guess what Councilor Leicester, what I'm looking for is your thoughts about if we take, say, assuming that the community's interest in offering community and cultural events and gathering places isn't likely to change since 2013 and in the foreseeable future. The question that I'm asking is, what external factors are you seeing that either are likely to help you work on that or are likely to get in your way?
Obviously, COVID's the main factor right now, or such other pandemic. From the point of view of cultural factors, we had talked about residential. Certainly what we're seeing is an influx of relatively new residents from GTA, KW, that type of thing is what we're seeing. And I think one of the things we're going to find out from that is they're used to more cultural, and I'm using cultural in a broad sense here because it can include a beer pub night. They're used to more events in the city that I think there will be a larger demand on our area to provide those types of experiences. And again, that's one of the things we always heard, even going back to my day when I graduated from university. Many people still wanted to stay in the London KW area because there are more experiences there. So I think what we're going to find is an increased demand. At the same time, what we're finding is a lot of these events in the past have been run by volunteers. And I think what we have seen has been some volunteer burnout. And then as people are, I'm not sure the right word for this one, but as people are busier, they don't have as much time to volunteer. And I'm certainly seeing, well, we still have good volunteers in our area and we're extremely fortunate. I am seeing some volunteer burnout. So that's one example. I'm not sure it's what you wanted.
May I ask, are you anticipating that some of the new folks moving in may help with that or aren't as likely to because maybe don't feel comfortable yet within community? Or
I anticipate that if given the opportunity that they will. The problem with it, and I've talked to some people now, the problem, especially with COVID, is they can't meet anybody, which is a slight problem. And then I think from what we will have to do is develop some strategy for trying to get both the new residents and some of the current residents back out again to get them involved, because I think we have to be more proactive. A lot of people a lot of people just need to be asked. You know, they're reluctant to volunteer. So you've got to balance off the need to ask versus the need not to be a pest and to bother them and to make sure some of them don't get overloaded. But yeah, I would certainly expect many of the people that are moving to the area, and it depends on the ages. And I think that's where we're going to have to keep our data driven as to what are the ages. Are they the ones that are 55 plus that maybe have more time or maybe not, depending on them, and what activities they want versus the 20 to 35 versus the ones that have children in any age bracket. They all have different needs and requirements.
So yeah, that is kind of the point I was going to make is we'll need to pay very close attention to changing demographics. So we've got a lot of new building going on, as the mayor indicated. Who's going into those homes? Are they young families, double income, or plus 55s? So depending on those changing demographics, you know, services will change quite a bit. And as Councillor Lifeso indicated, with an aging population of traditional volunteers, they just have less capacity to take on what they did in the past. So that combination of young families, double income, not able to volunteer versus the aging volunteer population may change considerably the kinds of services that we can offer and the kind of services that are required.
This spring is the 2021 census, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of changes you're able to observe from them. Yeah. Okay, good, thanks. Okay, are there other, looking about cultural events and gathering places, are there other things working for you, working against you that you can anticipate? Or should we move on to, what am I missing here?
Well, if you want to go back to the cultural events, I mean, the biggest cultural event that I think has been a big success is, of course, the Dirt Pigs tournament, which I consider a cultural event, which draws in a lot of people to the community. And again, that's primarily volunteer driven. But I did want to touch base on, I'm not sure hollowing out is the right word, but certainly not just Walkern, but the smaller hamlets such as Chepstow, Cargill, Elmwood, Pinkerton. Again, I think they're finding issues with well, some of them have issues with volunteers, others have no issues with volunteers. But I think one of the things we have to be careful about or look into is encouraging events not just in the center, but also in the other parts of the entire community, to be inclusive and make everybody feel part of the community.
Well, we did do that, Dean. We donated.
I'm simply saying that
Canada Day money to Cargill one year, if you recall, which I fully supported. And
I'm not saying we haven't. I mean, that's one of the things that we have, that if you want to say we have done it well, I'm just saying that we have, going forward, we have to bear that in mind as well, to keep it in mind also.
The need to do it will remain, and therefore you just sustain what you're already doing. Okay.
And as the mayor, yes, it's sustain what we're already doing, yes.
Tim.
And I might add that might even be happening, that change in demographics in a way could be happening even more rapidly in some of those smaller hamlets, because it only takes a few volunteers to drop out and all of a sudden you've got service clubs folding.
Yeah. Yeah, there aren't institutes anymore. Okay. Good. All right. Thank you for that.
So Bill, I'll just add on the cultural side, because you had asked the question. I think one of the pieces from 2013 was, the community centers that we have. And one thing that I think is important as we move forward is looking at those centers, what the services are that they can provide, but also how we liaise and how we work with those volunteers that provide a considerable amount of their own time. And I know there has been some conversations with some of the community center groups that we have around whether they should stay in a relationship with the municipality or whether they should be moving into more of a not-for-profit structure, given some of the financial reporting requirements and how they procure services, that sort of thing. We've certainly as a municipality, I think, benefited from a lot of volunteers stepping forward and providing their services. But given that they are governed by now municipal procurement guidelines, some of the challenges that certainly has imposed.
Right. Councillor Elphick, I say that it sounds like there's some advantages and disadvantages to them coming under municipal wing, to kind of put it that way.
And I'm not sure that I can speak directly to it, other than I think it's about how we communicate with those groups and how we can inform them about some of the processes that we are required to follow. Because I think it was a fundamental shift for that particular group that I'm speaking about. And I think now that there's been some greater communication, that it's a little bit different. But again, as we changed our reporting and as we changed our requirements, how we communicate that out to our volunteer groups so that they understand that as well is very important.
Thanks. Right.
Just one last comment on.
No problem. Yeah. Okay.
Again, one of the ones that is working as well, we'd be remiss not to mention Victoria Jubilee Hall, because they've done an excellent job in the past and going forward, with the hall itself and also bringing in shows and entertainment to the community.
I think. Yeah, when I was in Graven Nurse, we had an opera house that brought in, quite impressive entertainment, and it was a source of pride for people who didn't even go to the shows were proud of it. So I know what you mean.
Okay, Sonia.
Okay,
so next one is about preserving heritage and history.
Bill, I'll just have one comment. Through you, Mayor Peabody. I think, Walkerton's historically been known for its beautiful buildings and history and such. And some of those buildings are becoming, costly to upkeep. So I think it could be, to be wary that the future may change and how we, with accessibility requirements and all of those things, how we can sustain even some of the buildings that we have, but even in the community, it might become more difficult to.
Thanks.
Tim.
I think this goes to Bill's next point, but I think, the strategic plan really needs to contemplate like aging in place for a lot of our infrastructure. Like Ms. Watson was just saying that, we have a number of municipal assets that are dated, and we'll need to figure out whether those are going to be preserved or whether those are going to have a sort of a longer visioned plan. And what we as a council and as residents identify those to be and what those are not to be. But, to an earlier comment, the Dirt Pigs event, I think, has a lot of significance in our community. And we benefit that because of the way that the community center and gathering place is designed. We can have a number of baseball diamonds and community buildings very close by. If that were to change, where would that event take place? And if we were to eliminate having a community center downtown in downtown Walkerton, how that gathering would still happen? Just because it uses the entire complex. Same with our homecoming events, quite frankly. We were able to right now leverage large homecoming events because we have access to, in very close proximity, a number of buildings.
Thanks. Yeah, certainly. I mean, the constant threat, I guess, in the future to heritage buildings is age. Okay. Are there any programs right now that you've put in place for heritage preservation? Or you're cooking up? Is there any movement on this? Right? I know there's a. Do you have what used to be called a local architectural advisory committee?
Dean, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm actually the council representative on the Heritage Committee.
Okay.
We've had a very strong and active Heritage Committee for a number of years in Brockton. There has been a program, a loan program / grant program for heritage buildings, which really hasn't been taken much advantage of. Basically, because of the loan program, it's the other part, of course, is from the acquisition point of view, acquisition of artifacts that preserve Brockton history. And certainly one of the things we're discussing these days is a place to house the artifacts and show them and showcase them to the public. And we've also, in conjunction with the BIA, have run Doors Open every other year, with the exception of this past year because of COVID. And we've had a very enthusiastic response to Doors Open. And we've also had a lot of cooperation from the private individuals that have opened their houses and their buildings to us. Certainly, earlier when you were talking about external threats and or influences, the two of the big ones in Walkerton are obviously the jail and the courthouse, neither of which we have any control over. The jail is owned by the county and hasn't been used as a jail for a number of years now. So that would certainly be, again, not sure the right word for the jail, but that is certainly one of the key pieces that we have to look at moving forward. And again, from external influences, a lot of it's under the control of the county. So yeah, where do you go from there?
Yep, good point.
Good, thanks.
Okay, Fiona?
Helps when you're not on mute. Through you, Mayor Peabody. I think I would also point to the success of the art show, which has run annually for quite a long time. And I would say that some of the challenges to keeping these programs going that have been popular are space, for one. for a number of the programs, finding the right space, finding space to showcase items, space for the art show, just in general, adequate cultural or space that can be used for cultural purposes has been an external challenge, as has the volunteer commitment that's required for some of them, as Councillor Lifeso has indicated. But I would also hopefully say that there's also some opportunities to maybe rethink some of these items too. So the BIA was running for a while Throwback Thursdays, where they would post their old photos and things like that on Facebook, which were also, I think, really successful and generated a lot of interest. So the challenge has been the need for space, but maybe as we start to anticipate ways that we can provide services that are not as connected to being in a physical location, there's opportunities to do things differently as well.
Writing down notes here. Yeah, thank you. All right. So the next one from 2013 was opportunities to participate in and appreciate and support the arts. Maybe we've talked about that already. And any other, again, if we look to the future for these, are there factors that are going to help or hinder that you anticipate? You have lots of local artists? The future?
I mean, again, I think there's a little bit of the changing demographics. We may see, as Councillor Lifeso indicated, more demand for some of these arts and cultural kinds of things. So there may be more demand for seniors classes related to arts and cultural kinds of things. All of them sort of unknown at this point, but I know there are more of those available in other communities.
As Fiona pointed out, we do have the art show. There is an artist co-op, but it's the Saugeen Artist Co-op, so it's not specifically Brockton, but they are involved. So again, the issue comes down to is what support can we provide, and then how do we get that support known? And a lot of it also comes, and this goes back to the heritage as well a little bit, is personnel resources. In the sense that some of these are soft costs or soft services, but somebody has to be there to provide them.
Yeah.
And to coordinate, and not only just provide the space, but coordinate. And again, I think the other problem is always when you start talking art, most people have a very narrow definition of it. I mean, probably one of the most complimented pieces of art in Brockton right now are the silos on County Road 19. The silo on County Road 19. Which, quite frankly, is a work of art. And really is quite well done, actually. And does very much, get a lot of recognition, notice. So we may have to think outside the box as what actually constitutes art sometimes.
Good point, Dean, that the 2013 plan does have only that narrow definition that came out of whoever was contributing at the time. But you're right, dirt pigs, things like that. We do need to expand the definition of culture to capture all of our residents, what they like, not just the traditional view of arts. Good point.
Okay, thanks for that. Again, from 2013, Brockton supports and attracts local businesses to provide employment. You've done a fair bit of a business retention and expansion study as a model of its kind, and you probably don't need to retrace too many of those steps. But again, looking to the future, 5-10 years, what do you got? I'm assuming this whole issue about more people is an economic. If you're anticipating more people, then is likely to have an impact on the trades and on retail.
So yeah, I think related to that kind of a hindrance to continued expansion and growth, might be the lack of affordable housing, attainable housing. So again, we've got lots of businesses that perhaps see opportunity for growth, but if they have no manpower, then they can't grow the way they'd like to. So it impacts us in a lot of ways.
Thanks for that. That's starting to be a really common refrain across rural Ontario, strangely enough. Yeah, it's new, but it's very strongly felt everywhere I've worked. Okay. Other factors? Are you?
I go back to the economic for just a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I think we have done a good job of it, particularly in the last couple of years with the programs that are running. Dan had mentioned affordable housing. The other one that I noticed was affordable transportation. For many of the people, if the jobs offered are precarious jobs and they can't afford a car or can't afford a reliable car, how do they get to work?
Yeah.
So it's a combination of both affordable housing plus transportation. The other one, when it comes to looking forward to businesses, again, I think we have to, and I think we're starting to, but promote more of the agribusiness. And I think you had mentioned earlier in your talk as well. And then certainly we're looking into the community improvement program, which currently is just basically downtown Walker. And so that will be a bonus if we can expand it to the whole area. And then one of the other somewhat out of our control, but also in our control, is obviously zoning and planning. You know, can you operate a home business? What restrictions do we have to put in the whole business? For example, parking. If you're in a residential area, do you have enough parking for 5 people if they pull up in front of your house? Or should you have? So I think there's some planning, zoning issues that have to be looked at, or that will be looked at in the future.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you the Toronto papers are full of it these days about everybody's moving out to work at home and telecommute and so on. Not just temporarily, but permanently. What do you make of that? Is that a real thing? Are you anticipating that will in fact bring people in sort of prime working age and with families and so on bolster your minor hockey system? Where my mind always goes.
My two, if I may, go ahead, Sonia.
Oh, I was going to say, I do think it's a real thing. I think, we've just hired staff recently that are doing just that. So I think, it could, maybe they move here for a more, for the better life, better quality of life. And their partner wants to look at opening a business or may open up other business opportunities that one of them could be looking towards. So I think something we have to do is look at how we appeal to those types of groups, and part of that is having a well-rounded community to attract them here as well. And the only other thing, while I'm on that, when you asked about concerns, I think, or maybe you want to finish that topic first. I just have another one.
Yeah. So the topic is about what we anticipate for the future as far as attracting and supporting businesses in employment. So the notion of working from home, people who used to live in Milton or whatever it might be, say, you know what, I'm going to get out of here and live in Brockton, has possibility.
So yeah, I think we're finding through Zoom and all these meetings that there's a whole swath of, I would maybe term them service jobs. I'm sure that's not correct, but such as yourself, consultants, engineering consultants, accounting consultants who may have done things on a regional or national basis from a large center now know that they can still do those regional and national things from a rural area with perhaps frequent transportation into city areas. So those things are being proven now over the past year. The only other thing I wanted to contribute with respect to what's gone well and what we need to continue to do well. Over the last 20 years, we have had a business park that allowed businesses to expand and grow and that sort of thing. And we're at the full capacity now. So being able to provide that service in the future, available land for businesses that want to expand.
Fully built out, you're saying?
Yes, fully built out now.
Okay, right.
So it has been an advantage for us over the last 20 years to an advantage over other rural communities. So.
Thanks.
Again, my real life job is a real estate lawyer, so I have certainly seen some younger people moving up to the area. Some of it is people that are coming back to the area because they now know that they like living in the area. That's where they grew up. They want to return. They now have that availability. One of the key factors is broadband access, obviously, which is something that the Warden's Council is working on, and there's programs going out there. From our point of view, it will be to help implement those programs, and also to see where the dead areas are and if we can do anything to help that or lobby for increased access there.
And is that basically the action so far has been through the SWIFT and the counties and so on? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
How about Bruce Power? Is it a factor for you?
It's a factor in everything, yes.
Yeah.
Both, yes.
Through you, Mayor PY, I would just comment that, I think Bruce Power has been a attractor and stimulated the area for sure. And we've seen some great things because of it, and suppliers to the area. But it's also affected our manufacturers. We have some long-standing manufacturers and created a very tight labor market and competition for them. And, the lack of employees available to sustain their operations. So
can you get a time when it would be good to call him, tomorrow or the day after?
So I think that's evident, and how we continue to support developing skilled trades and supporting our local industry.
Good, thank you. Okay. All right. Councillor Lyshaw mentioned about agriculture. So one of the objectives was to be a community that supports the agricultural economy. Are there things you've done that you'd say this has worked or not worked? And similarly, if you look ahead 5-10 years, are there some things you'd say this is going to work for us or not, or work against us?
Well, I was reading that and I wrote down some notes. I believe our farm community doesn't want, a motherhood statements about buy more local food. What they really want is concrete supports for infrastructure. So enhanced attention to the gravel roads or even paving. And then one thing that we have done, not willingly, is to support the agricultural sector, since that was spending an awful lot of money on drains now, which support we're subsidizing the farm drains, which has added significantly to our budget in the last 7-8 years. Not willingly, but you could argue to those farmers that are benefiting from these drains that we are supporting them that way through the tax base. But I think they expect more concrete actions on the infrastructure front.
And broadband would apply to that as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And natural gas, support for natural gas. Yeah.
That's what I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
Yeah. If well, we'll know about that within a month. So. Okay, Kim.
It was the natural gas that I was going to bring up. Thank you.
As a positive so far.
Yeah. Fingers are crossed.
Mm-hmm.
You're anticipating that you may have a supplier?
Well, we have 2 suppliers, and one's asking for a $20 million grant from Cabinet, and the other's asking for 40. So they have 2 slightly different plans, and Cabinet will deliberate on. But then there's 120 applications in the province, so not everybody will win on this.
No.
So we'll see. It's a little bit of a lottery.
They can wrap the fiber optic cable around the pipes when they install them, and well, everything's done at once, right?
Yeah.
Have you done some things? I hear you're saying, Your Worship, that you've basically spent some money on drainage and roads that are important to the agricultural economy and what the farms are asking for. Are there other things you've done over the last few years, either that you'd say, didn't really make much of a difference, or that have proven worthy? Okay. Fair enough, no problem.
Sonia?
Next one was about tourism, promoting year-round tourism.
Bill, I would just comment, I think doing our community improvement plan, we have a intention through that to really focus on the agriculture community and what incentive programs we could look at there, and whether it's, supporting farm gates or signage or things that would really benefit the farming community. And I think, there was a business retention expansion done for agriculture producers in 2019 by the county, and for Bruce and Gray, and we participated in that, and there's some good actions that came out of that as well.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Sonia, because just finished working on a strategic plan for a municipality down close to London, where that was actually one of the reasons, expand the community improvement plan so that they could facilitate farm gate sales, signage, parking. Okay, good. All right, tourism was one of the items from the 2013 plan. Do you see things working in the future for you with tourism or against? I guess some of this relates back to the heritage comments, Councillor Lyso, that you were mentioning before. I mean, if some of the heritage features that people come to see are there, then that helps. If they're not there, then hinders, right? I know that's not the only source of tourism.
Sonia?
Well, I feel like I'm the only one talking today, and maybe Mark has more to say about this too, but we are part of the a group of municipalities and involving the Saugeen Valley, looking at the Saugeen River and how, because of people looking to do stuff locally, we've seen a drastic increase in use of people tubing and kayaking down our river. So how do we manage that? How does it become a, organized tourism type asset? So that's some pressure we're experiencing that we haven't experienced before.
Okay, Dean?
Oops, tourism, we actually had a lot of discussion at council over the past 2 terms about tourism, what we can do, what we can't do. One of the things I think we should probably be looking at in this plan is we always talk about tourism, but I'm not sure everybody knows. I think we have to define what we mean by tourism. And I think we have to define we have to set out what we feel is good tourism versus bad tourism, if I can use those 2 terms, and what exactly we hope to accomplish by tourism, how we're going to accomplish that, what our goals are. Because there's certainly, I live in the country. I don't like tourists driving by at 90 miles an hour on my road and I'm in a tractor dragging their canoe behind them. But at the same time, we do want to attract tourist people to our area to enjoy the restaurants, the events that we're putting on, and hopefully, come back to live or whatever. So again, we've had one of the successes recently, of course, is the Cargill and the Greenock Swamp. But again, I think we have to define what's meant by success as well. Again, how much money do we put into it? What return do we get? And is it an economic return? Is it a feel-good return, a soft return?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do attract the tourists here, or people just driving through town, how do you get recapture out of that?
Okay, Kim?
Thank you. At one time, we discussed all the bridges that are in this municipality and how it would be wonderful to attract people to tour them. But the horrible thing is we don't have the money to save these historic bridges. So, you know, it would be wonderful, but not feasible at the moment.
Yeah, that's a real life quandary right there, right? It harkens back to the Heritage Department.
Yeah, Bill, I think it would be, to reflect on what Dean said, important to include in the plan about mitigating the negative effects of tourism. In the Bruce County here, we've seen the peninsula overrun with tourists, awful lot of problems. Tobermory, Lions Head, Sauble Beach. And so people are very cognizant of the fact that there are now, well, there always were, but the significant negatives of tourism. And so people from southern Bruce County are now really locked out of going up the peninsula. So for example, the national park, the Grotto, you just can't get in there if you're a local. You have to be camping up there and get in the line for the reservation system at 6 a.m. And that's just one example. But,
have you had an issue with Airbnb partiers and so on?
I don't think we have. Don't think so. Yeah, that would be the type of negative tourism that you would want to protect your community against. Okay, Mark, you had your hand up?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. We all know that tourism exists in many forms, and they're all at different scale in terms of the size of the assets or their potential. You know, certainly when we think of events and tournaments and stuff, those may be short-term, 2 and 3 day economic generators. That type of tourism where people are looking for things to do in between their cultural events, or they come up a day before or stay a day later. Same thing with tournaments. So they do spend their dollars on shopping, gasoline, checking out other attractions, things to do. And then a lot of our tourism can also be natural heritage, you know, whether it's the Saugeen River watershed and all the recreational opportunities that may come with that. But, you know, in knowing the potential for those assets, like the mayor had suggested, is before you start marketing and promoting the heck out of them in their current form, doing some planning and groundwork to build that capacity so you can handle those visitors when they do arrive, because a lot of those visitors are already arriving through a lot of external marketing and promotion, not even beyond what just Haliburton County does, and which then can take a positive and turn into a negative experience or diminish the quality of the experience because we haven't planned and put the infrastructure in place to handle that type of tourism specifically. So a few key factors there to think about. Tourism can be very broad, or it can be a very specific asset with maybe minimal potential or huge potentials.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So into environmental integrity, Brockton's a community that recognizes and protects its natural assets. Heard Sonia talking about the Saugeen Valley before, and obviously something that there's an active attention to. Are there factors, maybe Mark, this is good, but what you're just saying, there are factors that you can anticipate in the future that are going to work against you. You know, untrammeled tourism would be an example. Say you don't have the can accommodate what you might fear could happen.
I think the mayor's used the example in the past of our Greenock Swamp, you know, largest wetland in southern Ontario. Lots of trails through there that are used by locals during hunting season, but not widely used. Certainly, it could be a bigger draw to tourists wanting to get out into the outdoors and explore the environment, but it is a sensitive environmental area as well. and has the potential to alienate locals.
Okay, well, next one was land use planning. So this is more of a sort of the general objective. It talks about visually appealing, environmentally responsible, talked about housing and variety of land use types and variety of housing. And it talked about green space and parks and trails. I suppose the foreseeable factor there is just more people coming, right? The pace accelerates.
Kim?
We can't have more people come if we don't have land to develop. So we need to lobby the county and the province to allow us to expand our small hamlets and even the town of Walkerton to allow for more development.
They just finished a plan in a municipality where they said, you know, we're good with the intensification the province requires. By the same token, on the other end of that diversification, you need to have, you know, what about the 1 acre lots that always used to be available for people who wanted to have the great big garage and their own repair shop and that kind of stuff. And so both sides, if you like, of the contrary to the status quo.
Dean?
That you think are going to have an impact on planning in the future?
I think just getting back to what you were talking about, obviously Stratford's the most recent example of agricultural versus intensification of housing or industrial. Again, and it sort of gets back to your environmental part as well, is how much land do you keep for agricultural purposes and how much do you put into urban and industrial land, which is always going to be an ongoing thing.
Comments?
Oh yes, Fiona?
Yes, when it comes to land use planning, I think we find ourselves at a bit of a crossroads right now. We've mentioned doing the CIP, but that's only one of the planning tools that might be available to us. And we might be at a time when it's worth exploring what some of those tools may be, whether it's, community benefits charges to pay for the infrastructure that may be needed by new residents, or if it's, updating to some of our planning documents. And those are difficult topics to address when I think we may also be at a time when, the county is looking to rearrange or reconsider how they are delivering that service to us as well. So we are in a time when we'll be exploring that relationship with the county and how we want to structure the planning services that we do provide to our residents. So I think the area of land use planning, I think we have a lot of opportunities for us, a lot of excitement and optimism for the fact that we have so many people who are looking to invest in our community. But I do think we have some challenges, and it's definitely worthwhile taking a look at what some of the other tools may be that we can make use of to capitalize on this time of excitement about our community.
Okay, Dean, one thing you referenced sparked this in my head was the Stratford turned down that the citizens turned down that glass plant because it was going to take up 25% of the town's water supply, and being an inland town, they didn't have the water. So looking at Walkerton, we only have probably enough water for 500, 600 more houses. So going down the road, 10 years, there will have to be a planning process put in place to look at the water supply, how to either expand that aquifer, put another well shaft down there, another pump, or find another well field closer to town. That was done in 2002, 2003 in an environmental assessment, and the results were a little bit disappointing in terms of the water supply in the area. So it sort of kicked down the road until now if we have this growth. So that's an absolutely critical planning item for the municipality, is the water supply.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good example of something that may not be issue in the next 5 years, but you got to start thinking now for a longer period of time, right? Yeah.
Sonia?
The only other thing I would comment on is the type of housing. You know, we seem to have a lot of developments happening all at once, but now developers are asking and commenting on, you know, the types of housing that we would like to see in our community. And so some guiding documents or developed to help guide those developers would also be preferable based on what we're currently experiencing.
And that gets you back into the comment made earlier about affordable, attainable priced housing that suits the labor force.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right.
I think Mark had one thing there.
Sorry,
through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of green spaces and parks, the number one ask and demand in most communities in Ontario, across Canada, whether it's locally, provincially, or nationally, is development of green corridors and trails. And the focus is getting away from neighborhood and community parks. And the fact that we do have some subdivisions under development, may have further in the future, how we connect our neighborhoods to our town center, how we connect them to other parks through trails and green corridors, I think is always a desired factor. In most surveys done with public, it often comes out as number one very clearly.
I'm a long distance cyclist every summer, fair weather cyclist, don't do it in the winter, but so I'm really interested in talking about, you know, how do you get from off-road trails from I don't know, Etobicoke to Brockton, for example.
Yeah. That's going to depend a lot on your demographics too, isn't it? Because if you have children that are, say, in that 3 to 10 age group, you want the local park. But if your children are older and you're older, or you don't have children, and that's probably when you're more looking into the trails, is my guess. But
that's a good point, Dean.
It does. It depends on population density of a neighborhood. It depends on the demographics. But you're not going to put a little playground every 2 blocks either. You're not going to dot your community with small parkettes all over necessarily. There's some new and improvised ways of dealing with trail corridors where you may have a wider section where you incorporate fitness equipment, where you may incorporate a playground on the side. So the traditional community corner lot as a park, a lot of communities are getting away from that, and it's getting more into trail linear type parks, corridors. So
I think I might also add that I think there's also, with a move to trying to be more active in dealing with the issue of childhood obesity, I think maybe that's also partly where the move towards trails is, where you have families that are trying to undertake an activity together. So it's not just a trail, but a trail that you can go cycling on as a whole family, or a trail that you can go snowshoeing on all together, so that you know, it's more of a family activity you're doing together, and less that passive, take your kids to the park, they play on the slide and you sit. And so I think there is a renewed interest in you know, cycling challenges at elementary schools and all that kind of thing. So I think there is an opportunity to tie in a renewed focus on some of those activities.
Okay, Tim?
So maybe just with that, for the strategic plan, some guidance on how other plans that are pre-existing, like we have a recreation plan, how that informs the overall strategic plan. Because I think, there's a number of, maybe I'll use the word ad hoc reports that are done, but how does council collect all that data and then bring it together for a strategic plan about, if it's related to trails and walkability and accessibility of our communities, what plan ultimately informs that?
Can I have a shot at that, if you, I mean, I guess, Councillor, I think it sort of works both ends against the middle. So some of the work that's been done, and frankly, the expertise of your staff, would go into thinking of with the action plan we're doing now. And similarly, some of the objectives or the initiatives that come out of this action plan would then show up in subsequent plans. So your Parks and Recreation Master Plan is fairly, I'm trying to remember now, is it 10 years old or in that vicinity? It's fairly old. So my guess is that if you were to do an update of that or a new one now, it would benefit from some of the things that council and through the community council says, okay, so we want to make sure that over the next several years, we're looking at X, Y, and Z. And so it would then inform the culture, the new version of the culture Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And similarly, things like the municipal services review that you've done or the business retention and expansion study. It'd be an awful shame if all that work weren't reflected somehow in, and a lot of consultations gone into those as well. So you'd want to see some of that reflected in the strategic plan for the next 4 years as well, recognizing that there are probably, as I said earlier in the day, probably more recommendations among all of those studies than you're going to have a chance to actually accomplish in a 4-year period, but you don't want to lose them. Does that help?
So I guess just on that point then is really talking about when that data becomes stale. I think that the strategic plan needs to acknowledge that there is a stale date as to when that information and the recreation master plan, I believe it was, actually spoke to that, saying the data, that if it's anything more than 10 years, that needs to be revisited. But I think the same is true for a strategic plan. There's been a number of things that have not been anticipated or contemplated, nor could have been, that this council now faces, especially related to COVID and the pandemic, a heavy influx in growth and development with people moving from urban centers into rural communities. How is that managed? Because you're going to have your long-standing rural residents, interacting now with the urban residents, and I think the demands for services are different. But we as council, they need to be informed about what that looks like.
Yeah, and I'm sure that a lot of that will emerge, will already have emerged from some of the consultation that's taken place already, and will certainly emerge from some of the surveys. And you make a really good point for our next week's discussion as well, because there may be some, I know from past experiences, the more pointed you can ask the questions in some of these surveys, that gets at exactly the kind of point you're raising. You say, okay, here's a conflict that we know is out there. So let's get at, potential solution 1, 2, and 3, or how important is it to you? I'm jumping ahead here, but how important is it to you that we, find a solution for X, Y, or Z issue? So yeah, bear that thought in mind for next week, because I think you're onto something that will really help us to fashion the survey results so that they work for you.
Thank you.
Right, we're nearing the end here. Moving on to the last one was quality of life indicators. So support for volunteers. So we've talked about that before. I don't think we need to belabor that in local organizations. Promoting safe and healthy lifestyles, which covered a number of fronts, including medical facilities, leisure services and leisure facilities, and safety protection services as well. Are there, in that batch of safe and healthy lifestyles, are there some factors that you see either working for you, where you want to be, or working against where you want to be in the next, say, 5-10 years. I'm harkening back to Fiona's comment about more of an emphasis than possibly there was even 8 years ago. I think it's been around a while now, but on active lifestyles, opportunity for families to get out and do stuff, as an example.
Sonia?
I think through you, Mayor Peabody, seeing the need for analyzing more e-services and how we can offer our services differently and more effectively and more accessibly to residents.
Accessibly, you're saying, in the sense of?
Yeah, and easier
not just
access.
physically, but
people are busy. How can they do things more quickly and more technology based, but while still, adhering to those requirements of those who can't do it that way.
Okay, Fiona?
I think there's an opportunity here as well to look at and incorporate the community safety and well-being plan that was created with a number, basically all the municipalities from Grey and Bruce County that already had a lot of data created and considered in drafting that plan in the first place. And I think that's a benefit for us because now when we come to implement those action tables that are in the plan, we are able to leverage the partnerships that we have with our neighboring municipalities where maybe our residents are going to be able to take advantage of a service that no one municipality could offer on its own. And I think that plan will also give us some indication of where the priority should be when planning for a safer and community and what's needed for wellness. So I think we have a tool that's available to us that already has driven on a lot of data. And I think the second advantage to that is that we are well positioned to be collaborative with our neighboring municipalities and both in terms of the community safety and well-being plan, but I think with the work that's happening with the Municipal Innovation Council as well. So I think, not taking for granted those strategic partnerships that we've already started and really leveraging to the best that we can, I think is a great opportunity for us as well.
Thank you.
Dan?
Yes, thank you. Something else that's worked well for us in that area, I think over the last 15 years has been our family health team and our physician recruitment retention committee. So we've been able to replace some of those aging doctors. And I guess the question I would have over the next 5 or 10 years would be what role our local hospital may play as technology process continues to evolve. What role can our hospital continue to play to ensure health and safety within the community and be a bit of an economic driver as well? So.
Okay. Dean? Oh, Kim?
Kim had her hand up first.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that with the growth of our population, we are going to be requiring more doctors and more space for these doctors to operate their practices. We built a new clinic 10, 15 years ago. And right now, I think we're looking at having to build another one.
Yeah, so that would have been 10 years ago, I guess. We rebuilt that portion of the hospital.
We should have doubled the size.
And the clinic is a municipal facility? It's owned
by the hospital.
Owned by the hospital, okay. Yeah.
Fundraised by the community.
Yeah. Okay.
My comment was transportation again. We've been, I think, fortunate in the past number of years to have the SMART system, which helps disabled people get to their medical appointments and other activities. It's certainly coming under economic pressure, and the SMART board recently lowered some services. They discontinued. But I do think that's one of the areas that may not just be our responsibility, but certainly work with our partners and hopefully at the county level. But again, it's transportation for those that are disabled. And it's not just, again, because we don't have buses. We don't have a bus service. So if you have to make a medical appointment, if you want to go to church, if you want to go out for an evening for well-being or even an afternoon, we have to look at those services that are available.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Tim, you had your hand up?
Yeah, it was just more so a comment around, shared services and also on partnerships. Going to the family health team example, we also at our community daycare, we have a partnership arrangement where, Brockton operates its child care center through a lease agreement with the local separate school board. But, long-term visioning from a strategic perspective about whether, those types of relationships should be, continued and sort of strengthened, or whether the municipality should be working, to establish its own, if it's going to provide that service. Like, I'm just wondering if the strategic plan can sort of speak to that. And much like we heard that the family health team is also at capacity, I think the same is true for our childcare center. Certainly that they seem to be filling up very quickly, and that will be true as our growth continues.
Really, the kind of question that it's going to be up to council. Whether it's the kind of question you could certainly address. Say, if even in some cases you may not have the answer, but you have the question, and if it's a reasonably complex kind of an issue to deal with, then it's going to take time and resources. So if it's going to take time and resources significantly, then it should be in your action plan for the next 4 years. Yeah. With basically instructions to staff or a task where you can figure out the exact, methodologies later on, whether it's a task force or, looking at other things around the province or how you do it. But if you know it's going to be, gobbled time and resources, then it should be in your plan. I like it.
And I guess sort of where I was going with that question is, there's a lot of examples of where there's value in shared services, and then other examples where they've also been a nightmare for some communities to be involved in. And we have, I think, a balance in Brockton. We have, some shared assets and so it's just really bringing that up to see if the strategic plan can help inform council on that in a long-term visioning strategy.
Good point, Tim. We don't own that daycare building that we're paying $72,000 mortgage on. There's a time lapse on it, so I know I won't have to deal with it when it lapses. So that's the only good part of that story.
As I recall, Your Worship, it has lapsed with our 2021 budget.
Oh,
Paid.
oh, right, we paid it off, but the 25 years, who knows what'll happen. There'll be a crossroads with the school board about that building because our agreement runs out. So you would hope they would just continue it, but saying what Tim pointed out, that could be one of the liabilities of the shared agreements.
And just on that point, as enrollment increases in those facilities for elementary school programming, we as the municipality may fall sort of to a compromise, as the school board requires that space potentially back.
Yeah, so anyway, that one's a long way off, but that's why it's good to consider during the strategic plan. Okay, Bill, you're gonna wrap it up here. It's
Wrap it up, yeah. So I think that probably does just fine for that. We talked transportation, we talked about that a little bit, and we can certainly come back to that later. It's bound to have an impact when we get talking about infrastructure. So next, on the 2nd of March, we're going to spend some time talking about surveys, a little more detail about how they'll be conducted and so on. And then what looking for council to do at that point is to say, can you give us, we need to be limited about this because people's attention span is, I don't know, mine's not great. So it needs limited. So we're really looking for, let's say 10 questions that we as pointed as possible, where we have other methods and it's been passed guidance and budget consultations and BRE studies and so on. So there's a fair bit of guidance already from the community on a number of fronts. And so we want to make sure that we approach these surveys with some specific issues in mind. Say, this is, you benefit from guidance And so in the next week or so, until we meet again, you might want to give that some thought as to, if you had your favorite top 10 questions that you wanted to ask the public for guidance on, what would they be? And with that, thank you for your attention. I will take, and say, if you have more questions about process and so on, we can talk about that next week as well. And in the meanwhile, I will start the shot at doing kind of a little bit of a quick summary. It's not going to contain a whole lot of detail, the quick summary of the stuff we've talked about over the last hour or so. Appreciate your input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if there's no comments in, we'll wrap things up. I know some people have meetings to get to. So we have a report there that Sonia put in, moved by Dan, seconded by Dean, that the Council of Municipality of Brockton receives report number CAO 2021-3, Brockton Strategic Action Plan 2025 update prepared by Sonia Watson, CAO, for information purposes. Are there any questions? Okay, all those in favor? It's carried. And confirmation of proceedings, moved by Kim, seconded by Tim, that Council of Municipality of Brockton authorizes that the following bylaw be read and acted, numbered, signed, and sealed, numbered as followed. Bylaw 23, February 24th, confirmatory bylaw. All those in favor? Okay, it's carried. And then we have a motion to adjourn at 3:33. Moved by Dean, seconded by Dan, that the Council of Municipality of Brockton does now hereby adjourn at 3:33 to meet again March 2nd at 9:30 for another special council meeting about the strategic action. Okay, all those in favor? All right. Okay. Thank you very much to everybody for their participation today. And,
Thank you.
Bill gave us some homework, so hope everybody comes ready. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
great rest of the day, everyone. Bye now.
Bye-bye.